a lot of the work that happens over at Youth Justice Coalition and how United Hood Nations is implementing that. Yes, faith works. Faith works. Talk to us about.
Well, to answer Les Hamasaki's question about a little bit of background, let me frame it. So I'm a probation officer, been a probation officer for 32 years. So if you go back in time 32 years ago, probation, in my opinion, is the hub of our criminal justice system, particularly here in LA County. And as such, the probation department here in LA County is the largest probation department in the world. That's connected to the largest jail system in the world. That's connected to the largest prison system in the world. So what we do right here in LA County is going to affect mass incarceration and all those byproducts of that. So I'm proud to announce that the entire criminal justice system, in my personal opinion, here in LA County has completely flipped over. We're no longer locking people up and throwing away the key, being tough on crime, 3 strikes and you're out, that type of stuff that we were doing back in the 80s and the 90s and 2000s. But here in 2020, we're now taking the savings from, instead of locking people up, let's say at $80,000 per year, about 30% of that, if we can reduce people from going in or reduce people from going recidivating, returning back, then that savings of taxpayers' money is now being spent on the front end, both on the prevention side and on the intervention side, to provide essentially jobs and education. So the basic premise or the basic data that was found to be true is that jobs and education will overcome crime and poverty for the targeted community, for the targeted population within that community. Every single time. We're not guessing what works, that's what works. Let me put it another way. There's an inverse relationship between jobs and education and poverty and crime. So when crime and poverty is high, like where's that seesaw around here? When poverty and crime is high, that means jobs and education is low in that community. When jobs and education is high, that means crime and poverty is low. That's called an inverse relationship. So we're not guessing what works, we know it works. So with that said, we're putting our tax-paying dollars now on the front end to stop crime, essentially, and recidivism on the front end by, like I said, prevention and intervention. So now, today, we are aligning all of our resources, all of our people, all of our programs. The resources come with land, people, and capital. Mm-hmm. That's the definition of resources. We're aligning our resources so that people coming out of jail and prison today, I'm really only talking for what I know here in LA County, can now, we have a step-by-step path and program and resources to get them from where they are to where they want to be. So let's say they get out of jail and prison with nothing. We put them on welfare. Why? Because they have to eat. We can then put them on that transitional subsidized employment or temporary subsidized employment that we were talking about earlier, so that they can get paid. Mm-hmm. We then can take them off of welfare, off of temporary subsidized employment, and get them permanent career opportunity jobs, working as a W-2 employee. We can then follow up with them continuously with job retention services and teach them how to be self-employed, save on their taxes, put a little money in their pocket, put a little savings in their bank account, and play that whole tax strategy game. And then ultimately we want them to move off of at least a certain percentage of them to move off their W-2 income, off being self-employed to being an employer, and also learning the game of how to be an investor, to invest their savings and their dollars to make even more money. From that and being an employer, we can go back to that TSC model that we were talking about. so that the temporary subsidized they can hire them at no cost to that employer, so that they can grow their business, be a bigger employer, so we can create a local scalable economy within that community. So those are the 7 steps that essentially that we have in place right now, that we can align ourselves not only individually, but also collectively, not only as a private nonprofit or small business, but also publicly leveraging our tax-paying dollars for that local economy.
Yes, and it's that Jobs Creates Peace, United Nation, faith in action, a little bit of all 3.
Yes, it's all the above because it's an all-in model. Let me put it another way. The problem is so pervasive that everybody has to do what they're here to do. Have to do their
Everybody's got it. All hands on deck.
All hands on deck.
Whatever you do it joyfully as unto the Lord. Let's serve one another.
And from a spiritual point of view, a faith point of view, you know, I believe that God has given everybody a gift, and that everyone needs to utilize that gift to meet some need in the community. When they do that, and when we collectively do that, then we can align ourselves together so that there's no needs that are not getting met. But right now we're a little dysfunctional and not in that alignment, and that's why we have all these needs not being met.
And so one of the things that we're celebrating is a document of fraternity, human fraternity. 800 years ago, St. Francis of Assisi and Sultan of Egypt, Sultan Kamal, signed a document in that effort, right, during the 5th Crusades, and now Pope Francis is standing up, you know, and speaking, trying to, I think, recognizing where we are in history, you know, to ask for forgiveness, in a sense, you know, from some of the atrocities of transatlantic slave trade, of white supremacy, of what we're talking about, you know. And we have the opportunity to, in that healing process, you know, the scientists are even showing how much forgiveness heals.
That's right?
And so as we talk about trauma, you know, and having our communities prepared to be community health workers, and heal trauma and prevent trauma, our starting point is something like today, faith, you know, for forgiveness, right? Believing that we are loved,
That's
right? And able to love one another, right?
So if I may, just a moment, please. Let me do my intro. This is Andrew. This is Andrew Williams Jr. And among other things, I'm here representing the Universal Citizens Media Network and TRN.TV, the Revelation Network. I'm honored to be here with Brad Carson, Sir Bailey, and Les Hamasaki. In particular, with Les Hamasaki, it's very important to me because it was Tom Bradley, his election in 1973, that raised my aspirations in Macon, Georgia, that I had found someone that could be representative of me as an African American man, right, in the United States after Martin Luther King was killed. So Tom Bradley has a lot to do with my coming here to Los Angeles, and I'm very pleased to have met Les Hamasaki, who is one of the last remaining members of the Bradley administration. So Les, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about the Tom Bradley and your relationship with him. And
First, I have to admit that I'm going to be 81 years old in January, so I've been around the block many times and met a lot of different people. But my experience with Tom Bradley is really accidental. I mean, I'm from the big island of Hawaii, came to Los Angeles in 1957, knowing what I wanted to do, and kind of went around and I went to UCLA, and then we went to Cal Poly and learned about landscape architecture and that kind of stuff. I didn't know what I wanted to be, but somehow my mother said to me, she was living here, she said, you better work for the city because they can't fire you, you're Japanese, kind of thing at that time. So I applied for the city and started to work in the city I think in 1967, right after the Watts riot at that time. And there I had the experience in terms of a lot of things that I've done, learning about the city and really getting to know the politics of things. And I started the what I call the Affirmative Action Association for the Asian Americans. At that time, we had the Latino group, and then we were trying to get the blacks there. I think it was in '72, and I became the first president of the association with the idea that we were going to really help our members to be sure that they're not discriminated against. And so we got the Latinos and the African Americans at that time. But what I really, the experience was really, the other thing that happened to me was that I worked with the Cultural Center in Little Tokyo.
Japanese Cultural Center?
The Japanese Cultural Center. And I started a group called Friends of Little Tokyo Arts, and we brought a famous artist to do a plaza in First Street and on San Pedro, and that we created a plaza, which we didn't know that it was a historical site called Azusa Street. And I'm not sure if you know about Azusa Street.
Well, tell us.
My mother was a Pentecostal.
Okay.
She went to, to listen to Catherine Coleman, and at the Shrine Auditorium, and she had cancer, so she was trying to save in terms of herself, in terms of, the Lord will follow her, and she went up to Catherine Coleman, and she and my brothers fell over, kind of thing, and so forth. I kind of watched all of these things, and I didn't really understand in terms of they were talking in tongues and so forth, but I attended several of the meetings. But coming back to the Friends of Little Tokyo Arts, we started to try to create a plaza, and that plaza in Little Tokyo was next to where the Azusa Street Mission was located.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know the Pentecostal movement, it's the birthplace of the Pentecostal movement in Little Tokyo off of San Pedro. And the interesting thing, it was what I call the multicultural spiritual door to the world in the City of Angels, that in April 9th, 1906, a son of slaves from Texas, blind in one eye, came to Los Angeles and started the spiritual movement on April 9th, 1906, that started a worldwide movement. And today we have about 600 million followers throughout the world today. But the unique thing about it is that in 1906, everything was segregated by ethnicity. The blacks had the church, AME church, the whites had the church, the Japanese had the church, the Chinese had the church, and so forth. But Azusa Street brought a multicultural congregation of white, blacks, Hispanics, and Asians at that time. So I felt that it was something very special in terms of what we went through, in terms of, I call myself that I was the son of Pearl Harbor, born in 1939 and 1941, December. That was the day of infamy that affected the lives of Japanese Americans. My grandfather on Hawaii was put into prison camp immediately after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, because he was probably connected in terms of bank accounts in Japan and so forth. So looking at my life, it was really centered around the whole idea of social justice in terms of what my experience was about. And so by working with Tom Bradley at that time, he opened up the city to become a multicultural city. Before, the former mayor Yorty was a white man and from the from the valley, and so it was separated. But Mayor Bradley brought the whites and the blacks, Jewish as well as seniors, as well as youth, to really create a kind of multicultural society. And I look at that in terms of what William Seymour did in Los Angeles in 1906, creating a multicultural congregation. Mayor Bradley created a multicultural city. And then I'm from Hawaii, and President Obama is from Hawaii and created a model multicultural family. I mean, when you look at the family, it's a beautiful kind of representation of America, not only of the blacks and whites and Asians, but when I look at that, so I asked a couple of people, and I've been on the board of directors of Tom Bradley Legacy Foundation at UCLA, and with Bill Elkins at that time, and Easy Wilson and several people, we started that, and I think I'm the only one standing alive yet.
Well, Adrian Dove, I think, might have been involved with that. He's still alive as well.
Yeah, and so this is something that it's still going on. But what I wanted to do is for me, the African Americans. My son was married to an African American at one point, but I look at the African American as an amazing race. When you feel and what I consider is really from a program that I was trying to implement was the Tom Bradley legacy and legends of African Americans, the amazing race kind of thing. That somehow, if you look at the African American race from 400 years ago and coming today, and look at all of these important people. I mean, you wouldn't see the Japanese or any of these guys in that kind of caliber in terms of athletics, in terms of spiritual leaders like Martin Luther King, along with education and all of those things that from music, it's changing very rapidly. And so when you look at that and envision a place like, say, the African American Museum, where you have a plaza there, that you have a sculpture piece of different venues, whether it's the music or, whether it's a metal sculpture or
hologram.
Yeah, different kind of images where you can come and listen to the African American, whether it's Louis Armstrong, the music with virtual reality, as well as all of these things that can be done, and have a media comments around with the media right now with these panels on the buildings. I think the kids can really bring in the information in terms of the incredible experience about the young people talking about the legacy and legends of this historical individuals. And so this was something that I was trying to push for a couple of years, but it never really took off the ground because I was trying to find an African American to kind of promote that. I mean, for me to say all this stuff, it's kind of weird in terms of what I felt, what I'm doing and that kind of stuff. But anyway, I landed with, Andrew a couple of days ago. We were talking with Lynn Crandall and so forth, but hopefully something could be done. But coming back in terms of, I'm an urban planner. I've been with the city of Los Angeles many years, and looking at it, eventually becoming involved with the policy side. And I was on the airport commission under Tom Bradley, with Johnny Cochran, and then later on with Reardon as a planning commission. So we look at sort of policy in terms of all of these things. And the planners have a tendency of, well, we look at 20 years in advance. We can kind of predict in terms of trends and things that are happening and the cause and effect of all of these things, whether it's the congestion or whether it's the criminal justice system and so forth. And so I've written articles with a newspaper called the Inland Empire Business Review kind of thing for many years. But I've written a lot of things, but I don't think anybody reads anymore, you know. But looking at the war on drugs, which we're dealing with right now, in 1973, Nixon created the war on drugs. His idea was, you know, the hippies in the 60s were protesting it, and the blacks were burning the cities and towns. And so they're not going to vote for him. So the war on drugs with marijuana created that kind of impetus in terms of the acceleration of the Incarceration Nation, where we have 25% of the total prisoners with only 5% of the population. And so when you look at the prejudice that was really developed with you know, in terms of the police and the politicians, you know, because the Africans or Americans were burned out. And then at that time you had the Equal Rights Amendment in the 60s with Martin Luther King and President Johnson, that turned over the whole Democratic South to a Republican South at that time. That shifted everything very quickly around. That's part of the strategy also. And so when you look at what we've caused in terms of a policy that was a criminal justice system versus a healthcare system, this was really, that created an immense problem, because for 40 years we went into the cartels in Colombia, and we destroyed, and you know, we had the demand here, the supply was there, and so it's a supply and demand. And so when you had the rise of the street gang, like the mafia, when we had prohibition of alcohol, the street gangs with selling drugs was easy. It's easy money. That really facilitated the transition of the rise of the street gangs, and it drives the neighborhoods throughout the area. And so you had the compound situation. And then in addition to that, when we went into the Colombia and we destroyed the cartel, the cartel went to the then kind of Republic of Central America, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and so forth. And then you had the migration, immigrant population that created much more of a problem also. So you have to look at the big picture in terms of policy and its impact in terms of whether it's the rise of the street gangs or in terms of you know, the whole Incarceration Nation, or you know,
and the impact of NAFTA,
yeah,
and changing the drug routes from going over to the sea to coming in through Mexico, and influencing here in Los Angeles in particular the Freeway Ricky Ross and the involvement of the CIA, and making sure that drugs flooded Los Angeles to increase the problems that we had that led up to the Rodney King riots.
Right. Now, I think when you know, looking at the changes that are occurring with the marijuana and so forth, and the social justice system that's happening right now, and you know, millions of dollars are allocated to social justice program to really help the people that have been incarcerated coming out and creating jobs, are really instrumental, because like you mentioned in terms of the cost, I mean, it doesn't really make sense in terms of, if you look at the overall cost in terms of incarceration versus training and so forth. But the big picture that I see from a planning standpoint is really the, I call it the, a period where things are changing in terms of the whole workerless or workless society.
Right.
Where on the left you have automation taking over the factory jobs, and then on the left there's artificial intelligence taking away professional jobs.
Right.
And then in the middle you have Amazon taking away retail jobs.
Right.
So we got to rethink in terms of a system with the information highway. It becomes more, the hierarchy is really not the way of managing the operation. And because the information technology wiped out the so-called top heavy in terms of the hierarchy, and mainly I think the whites here, you didn't need the whites anymore to be supervisors and so forth. And so when you wipe out that, you have the rise of the community, the white people getting together and having their own getting against Obama and all this kind of things that's happening. So it's really you got to look at the big picture, and I think in terms of what I'm all about is really we have a program at the church downtown Los Angeles growing these vertical farms. In terms of that's where the future will be.
What's the name of the church?
The church is the Union Church of Los Angeles on San Pedro and 3rd Street. And I mean, although the church is dying because there's very few people coming down to church anymore, but the idea was growing these vertical towers and planting the and it's everything is automated. I mean, you don't have to dig in the ground and so forth. It's an aeroponic technology where you use water and air that NASA was really building right now, because when you go on the moon, you're not going to be planting on the dirt. It's really it's going to be designer plants, and you can put the nutrients in and grow things, and then deal with the health, and all of these things are going to be interconnected. So I think in terms of the basic problem that I see, say for people that have been incarcerated, if we can teach them in prison to grow the plants with seedlings and feed the the cafeteria, and learn how to do the health and wellness kind of plants in terms of vegan style and salads, seasons, whatever. This might be a way of getting them into a transition, like the Japanese gardeners that was here a long time ago, 100 years ago, and planted, taking care of gardens. Now it's really providing the food, because when you look at the big climate change, not only the gasoline and the energy generation, but it's really the big farms that are the industrial farms that are polluting the groundwater, as well as creating GMOs, and so it's you can really plant a lot of food on your own vertical farm in a patio, and the mayor has about 20 of these things going. So my thinking was, one of the things that we can do in order for the so-called people that are incarcerated, them to grow the thing. One of the problems that I have is that I can't remember, whether it's the members come in and pick plants and take it home. We have the Green Harvest Sunday, and they'll is this plant. know some of them, like lettuce and so forth, but Swiss